Hi there, welcome to Walks on the Wild Side. I'm Scott Walker, and in this video I'm out looking for the famous grouse. No, not the bottle of whiskey, but the bird that appears on the bottle of whiskey, the red grouse. And by the time this is done, I might need a dram or two of it because it's much colder and windier than the forecast predicted. So let's go. So let's talk about the red grouse. The grouse is a so-called game bird that's only found in the British Isles. And in fact, there's almost none in southern England. So the best places to go looking for them are in our national parks. So from the Peak District into the Yorkshire Dales, the Lake District, and up into the borders of Scotland. And then there's a bit of a gap, and you'll find some more from Loch Lomond and the Trossachs going up to the Cairngorm Mountains. Then there's another group around Snowdonia, and you'll find some scattered throughout the island of Ireland. So the red grouse will spend a lot of their time in heather, and you see behind me there's masses of heather, and there's likely to be hundreds of grouse in there. So what you need to do is use your ears, and they are your best friend when it comes to finding grouse. So I'll play the grouse sound now. And that's what you want to look out for, or listen out for. And when you hear it, you can get down low and start moving nearer to the sound. Now, it's quite difficult today because it's pretty windy. So as soon as the wind stops for a moment, I stay perfectly still and listen for where I can hear those grouse sounds and edge towards it. Now, it's also useful to think about places where you can compose a shot for when the grouse flies out of the heather and maybe will land on a rock or on some grasses or something like that, because you're not going to get photos of them whilst they're in the heather. The grouse is quite a small bird. It's about the size or maybe even slightly smaller than a blackbird. So whilst it's in the heather, it's just too small to see. Think about how you can get a shot of the grouse once it flies out of there. Just to demonstrate how difficult these birds are to track, here's some footage of where I was setting up, ready to show you the stalking technique for a bird I'd heard. So they're really hard to find by sight, they're really small, and because you can't see them, you never know exactly when they're going to take off. Your fieldcraft is far more important in this circumstance than your ability to use the camera. So to capture photos of these birds, you really need to use your best stalking skills. I just managed to get a couple of lovely shots of a grouse on this wall behind me, but it was difficult because I only had a short period of time. There were some dog walkers coming with some yappy dogs, and I knew it would scare the grouse away, but I'd been edging closer to it, stalking it, and getting closer and closer. And I got a couple of shots as I was getting to it, but not shots that are good enough to use. But I'll show them now just to demonstrate that you move closer and closer and the bird becomes more comfortable with you, or at least knows you're not a threat. And that allowed me to get close enough so that when the bird hopped onto the wall, when the dogs were coming, I managed to grab a quick couple of shots. The dogs got too close and the bird flew off. So here are those shots. I'm going to show you a series of unedited raw files to explain my thinking. Here is where I first got sight of the bird, and this photo is only for the purpose of getting the exposure right. I wait and I check that the bird doesn't seem stressed. If I'm stressing it out, then there's no purpose going further, it will just take off. So I edge closer and take another test shot to check the exposure again, and wait some more. Then when I'm confident that the bird is comfortable, I'll move again. But the grouse and me both heard the dogs coming. It jumped up onto the wall and I took another test shot. The exposure was wrong this time because of its new position and lighting situation. I'm now assessing the composition as I start to get closer to the bird. is the background what I want? How should I position myself to get a nicer picture? I don't like all the dark patches in the background. They're too similar colour to the bird. So I change the angle that I'm facing the grouse to get a lighter background. It's better, but we're not there yet. But I've got my exposure right again. I move around slightly more and change to portrait orientation, mainly because the bird has stood up. So it has its neck stretched out and it's taller than it is long in the picture. But it also cuts out more of those dark patches in the background. And that was the final shot until the dogs got too near and the bird flew off. All that time spent edging nearer, correcting the exposure and sorting out the composition meant that I was ready to get a good photo before the bird took off. If we look at the histogram, we can see that there are no blown out pixels, which is important because the grouse is dark but it has white legs and you can still see all the details in the white. There are some crushed shadows, but these are just in the gaps in the dry stone wall, so I'm not bothered about them. So how did I get from this to the final image? In post-processing, I changed the aspect ratio from 2:3 to 4:3, which is my preference for most portrait orientation photos. 2:3 just looks a little too long and thin for my tastes. I changed the white balance because I felt there was too much green in the picture, a greeny yellow in the background and a green on the dry stone wall. I did some dodging and burning to the wall to give it more of a 3D feel and some noise reduction as it was shot at ISO 2000. Here I filmed myself capturing a photo and I'll take you through my thought process. I heard red grouse and realised it was up on the rocks by that small mound ahead, and there was no chance I could approach it without being seen. So as I walk up the path, I'm never turning my face towards the birds. Birds are really good at knowing if they're being watched. If it thinks I'm not paying attention to it, it will ignore me. I reach a point adjacent to the grouse and most of my body is hidden behind the long grasses. So I take a test shot to check the exposure. The bird hadn't seen me. I realised that with the position of these rocks, there was no way to get a clear background. So I have to find a way to get the most separation I can whilst also finding a nice composition. I move further up the path and from here I'm fairly well hidden, so I move into the grasses to find my composition. I've got some nice diagonal lines here across the image with the bird offset to the right. The immediate background is fairly near to the bird, but it's not too distracting and there's nothing blocking the view of the bird. It's got some nice layering from front to back and it's a composition that shows the bird in its environment. Now, I usually like, when I'm moving distances, to have my tripod or monopod, but in this case, I expected that I'd be doing a lot of the photography on the ground because that was what happened last time I photographed red grouse, although that was maybe 3 or 4 years ago now. But it's turned out that most of the photos I've captured have actually been whilst the grouse have been on a wall or rocks or something like that. So I may have been better to have used my monopod. In terms of shutter speed, because I've been shooting handheld, it's meant that I've had to go for a little bit higher shutter speed. For a still subject, I'd shoot at something like 1/250th of a second, and for in-flight shots, I'd maybe go for 1/1600th of a second. But because I've not been doing that, and because it's also been windy, I've had to increase my shutter speed substantially, and the wind is something that's important to account for. Now, I have got lens stabilization and in-body stabilization, and that's all switched on, and those toys will help me a little bit. But it is important to recognize that when you're shooting handheld, your camera with this big lens on it acts like a weather vane, and that adds a little bit more motion into the picture. So it's really important to go for slightly higher shutter speed than you would use when it's not windy. Now, if you're interested in photography of how to use a monopod with a gimbal on it, which is my favoured method, then you might like to check out this video. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.